The man in the passenger seat is Ken Eto. For 30 years, he has run the Chicago outfit street lottery. He is sentenced in 11 days. And tonight, the men who own that lottery have decided to kill him before he can trade what he knows. February 10th, 1983. A parking lot on the northwest side of Chicago, just after dark. He knows. That is the part people miss when they hear this story. He gets into the car anyway because a capo named Vincent Solano invited him to dinner. And in Chicago, you do not tell a capo no. Saying no is its own kind of confession. So he sits down in the passenger seat of a car with two men he has known for years and lets them drive him wherever they are going. Jasper Campise, 69 years old, an outfit veteran. John Gattuso, who carries a badge, a Cook County Sheriff's deputy drawing a second income from the syndicate. They drive. They park somewhere quiet. Gattuso is behind him, 3 shots. A .22 fired at arm's length into the back of Ken Eto's head. And then something happens that has no business happening. Ken Eto does not die. He does not even lose consciousness. He feels the impacts. He feels the blood coming down the back of his neck. And some cold instinct, 40 years old, tells him to go slack and let his head drop forward. So he does. He plays dead while 2 experienced men lean over him and satisfy themselves that the work is finished. They leave him in the car and walk away. When the footsteps are gone, Ken Eto sits up in the passenger seat of his own execution, opens the door and walks out onto Grand Avenue with 3 bullets in his head. He finds a pharmacy. There is a pharmacist behind the counter, a man named Morris Robinson, and Eto says 4 words to him. "I've been shot." Here is the question this story answers. The outfit used this man for 3 decades and never once let him inside. He was not Italian. He could never be made, never be family, never sit at the table he was paying for. And he is the one who walked away from them, the only one, while the 2 men who shot him were dead within 5 months and 15 of their people went to prison on his word. So how does the outsider survive the organization that swallowed everyone else? And why did 3 bullets fired into the back of a man's head at point-blank range fail to do the one thing bullets are for? The answer to the second question is a small, stupid, physical detail that nobody in that parking lot could have known. The answer to the first is the outfit's own rule about who counts as one of us. By the end of this, you will see that they are the same answer. Start with who he actually was, because it explains everything that comes after. Ken Eto was born on October 19, 1919, in California to Japanese immigrant parents. He grew up American in a country that was about to decide he was not. When the war came, the United States government moved 120,000 people of Japanese descent, the majority of them American citizens, behind wire. Eto went to Minidoka, a relocation camp in the Idaho desert, a place of tar paper barracks and dust and communal latrines, where families who had owned businesses in Seattle and Portland the year before now waited for permission to exist. In 1942, he was arrested there for violating the wartime curfew. Hold that fact, because it is the seed of everything else. Before he ever met a gangster, before he ever took $1 of outfit money, an American court had already explained to Ken Eto what he was. A man who lived inside the country, but not inside its protection. Someone who could be counted, listed, moved, and locked up on the strength of a last name. He learned that lesson at 22, and he learned it from the government, not from the mob. Everything the outfit would later do to him was, in that sense, a repetition. When the war ended, the camps emptied and the people inside them started over, usually somewhere they had never lived, usually with nothing. In 1949, Ken Eto came to Chicago. Chicago in 1949 is a city where the street is organized. Every policy game, every card room, every wire room, and every neighborhood answers, eventually, to the same syndicate. The outfit Al Capone built and quieter men refined into something far more durable than Capone ever was. And that syndicate has one hard structural problem. It is Italian by blood and by rule, and the money it wants is not. The money is in neighborhoods where an Italian collector is a stranger and a target. Black neighborhoods on the south side, Latin American neighborhoods on the west side, Chinese gambling on the near north. The outfit's answer was always the same, and it never changed in 50 years. Find a man from inside that world who can run the game, take a percentage of everything he earns, protect him from the police because his arrest is your loss, and never, under any circumstances, let him into the family. Ken Eto was that man for 30 years. He built his operation around Bolita, a lottery the FBI would later describe in its own case files as a numbers game played among Latin Americans in Chicago. The appeal was that it required almost nothing. A player picks a number and hands a runner a few coins. The winning number is drawn from numbered balls in a sack. There is no bank, no ledger, no receipt, nothing on paper for a prosecutor to subpoena, and the entire apparatus can be carried in a shopping bag and reassembled in a different basement the next morning. What made it enormous was volume. Pennies and quarters from thousands of players, 6 days a week, gathered by hundreds of runners, passed to managers, counted in rooms that moved whenever they had to, and pushed upstairs. At its height, Eto's operation was handling somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 a week. Adjusted into today's money, that is roughly $500,000 a week, in cash, generated by a game played with a paper sack and a piece of chalk. He was good at it in a way the outfit found faintly unnerving. He was quiet. He was punctual with other people's money. He did not drink himself into stupid situations. He did not solve problems with a gun. And in 3 decades, he never produced a headline. In a business that manufactures headlines, that is a rare and expensive skill. Tokyo Joe, they called him, and often things considerably worse than that. He answered to all of it, took his end, and went home. And every single year, the arrangement stayed exactly what it had been on the first day. He earned like a made man. He was never going to be one. That is not a hurt feeling. It is a structural fact with consequences. In the American Mafia, the ceremony of induction is not a party. It is a legal document written in blood. A made man sits inside the rules. His murder requires approval from the top of the organization. His disputes go to arbitration instead of a shotgun. He cannot be killed casually, and if he is, somebody answers for it in front of other bosses. An earner who is not made has none of that machinery. He has exactly one asset, usefulness. On the day his usefulness runs out, or the day it turns into risk, there is no procedure standing between him and a decision. There is no committee, no appeal, no delay. There is a phone call. Ken Eto understood the terms completely. He accepted them because in 1949, there were not many doors open to a man who had spent the war behind wire, and because the money was real, and it arrived every week. But he also did something the outfit never once noticed him doing. Quietly, for 30 years. He paid attention. He learned which police captains took envelopes, and how much, and how often. He learned which district commanders adjusted their patrol maps for a fee. He learned which sheriff's deputies moonlighted as muscle, which ward offices made a phone call when a game got raided by an officer who had not been informed, and which lawyers were really working for whom. He learned the plumbing of a city, where the money entered, whose hands it passed through, and whose signature made a problem stop existing. He never wrote any of it down. He did not have to. He was the man in the middle of it, and nobody in the middle of an operation forgets who was paid. That knowledge sat in his head for 3 decades, inert and useless, because there was no reason on earth for Ken Eto to say any of it out loud. It is worth being precise about what that protection actually bought, because it is the difference between a street hustle and an institution. A numbers game is fragile. It needs a fixed place to count money, fixed routes for runners, and fixed hours. And every one of those things is visible to any patrol officer who cares to look. A game with no friends inside a police district survives about a month. A game with friends survives for 30 years, gets warned before a raid, loses a low-level runner occasionally as a token arrest, and never loses the room where the cash is counted. That was the arrangement Eto managed. Not just the lottery, but the layer of the city underneath it that made the lottery permanent. He was, in effect, the accounts payable department for a system of small, regular corruptions. And every payment he made was a name and a number stored in the memory of a man everyone had decided was not one of them. Then, at the start of the 1980s, the federal government took an interest in his lottery. The case was not glamorous. Federal prosecutors in Chicago had spent years grinding through gambling investigations. And Eto's operation was the obvious target, enormous, decades old, and staffed at the bottom by people who could be squeezed. Runners get arrested, runners have families, small salaries, and no oath. One of them explains how the money moves upward. The next one names the manager above him. That manager explains where the counting room was last month. It is slow, unglamorous work, and it climbs. In January 1983, it reached the top of the operation, and a jury convicted Ken Eto on the number scheme. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. At 63, with a conviction in a federal gambling case, he was facing the kind of sentence that does not end in a homecoming. And every man above him in Chicago could do that arithmetic just as easily as he could. Now sit on the other side of that verdict for a moment. You are Vincent Solano. You are an outfit capo, and in daylight, you are the president of Labor's Local 1, a union office that gives you a title, a desk, and a legitimate reason to be a man of standing in Chicago. Everything you have rests on a single assumption. The people who work for you do not talk. And Ken Eto is now 63 years old, convicted, facing a prison sentence at an age where a prison sentence is a life sentence, and carrying 30 years of your business behind his eyes. He knows the police names. He knows the schedule of payments. He knows the counting rooms and the ward offices. And he is not family. There is no ceremony binding him to you, no oath, no blood, only 3 decades of being told politely and constantly that he was not one of you. Solano did not wait to find out whether the loyalty was real. According to the FBI's own files on the case, he ordered the murder. The plan was routine, and that is exactly what makes what happened next so remarkable. On February 10th, Eto was invited to dinner. Campise and Gattuso would collect him. They would drive him somewhere quiet and do the work with a small caliber pistol, a .22, the professional's tool, because it is easy to conceal, it makes little noise, and the bullet does not exit and go looking for a witness. Chicago would wake up to a missing gambling boss, no body, no story, and no headlines. In a week, somebody else would be running Bolita. 2 experienced men, point-blank range, a target who had no idea where he was going. There is no version of that plan that fails. It failed. Gattuso fired 3 times into the back of Ken Eto's head. All 3 rounds struck bone. None of them went through. They knocked him forward, they bled badly, and they stopped at his skull. That is the whole miracle, and it is not a miracle. Investigators would eventually establish the reason, and it is almost insultingly small. The cartridges were underloaded. There was not enough powder behind those bullets. A .22 round is light to begin with, and a .22 round with a weak charge is a bullet without a job. Somewhere in the chain, someone had used old ammunition, or cheap ammunition, or rounds loaded by an amateur. And the entire arithmetic of the Chicago outfit came apart on a few grains of gunpowder. Eto lay in the passenger seat and played dead, and here his own history did something for him that no plan could have. The reflex to go still, to become an object, to survive by being exactly what somebody else had already decided you were. He had learned that at Minidoka at 22 years old. He held it now, bleeding, with 2 killers a foot away deciding whether to fire again. They decided the job was done. They walked away from a living witness. Then he got up, bleeding heavily in the dark on a Chicago street. He reached that pharmacy on Grand Avenue and said his 4 words. Morris Robinson called an ambulance. In a hospital that night, a surgeon removed 3 flattened slugs from a man's scalp and told him he was going to live. By sunrise, every calculation in the city had inverted. The men organized crime used and never counted are what this channel digs up one at a time. Subscribe if that is the kind of history you want. Understand precisely what the outfit had done to itself. They had not merely failed to kill a man. They had taken the one person alive who knew their gambling business from the inside. The runners, the counting rooms, the police, and they had demonstrated to him, in the most literal way available, exactly what 30 years of service had bought him. Every argument for keeping his mouth shut, every appeal to loyalty and respect, and the organization taking care of its own, had just been fired into the back of his head 3 times and left in a parking lot. The FBI reached his hospital bed with a very short pitch. They did not need to argue. Consider what the agents were looking at. A man in his 60s, bandaged, with 3 bullets recently removed from his scalp, who had just been driven to a parking lot by people he had worked beside for years. There was no need to explain to him what the organization thought of him. The organization had explained it, in the only language that does not require translation. Whatever an agent might have said about doing the right thing was beside the point. The case had been made for them, at arm's length, with a .22. And there was a second, colder calculation available to Eto, and he was a man who had spent 30 years making cold calculations for other people's money. He was going to prison either way. The only question left was who would be waiting for him when he got there. Because a man who survives an outfit murder attempt and then walks into a federal facility full of outfit people does not survive twice. Ken Eto became a government witness. The first consequence was not in a courtroom. It landed inside the outfit itself because the syndicate now had a second and sharper problem. 2 men who had botched the most important piece of work in the city and who were now arrested, exposed, and sitting where federal prosecutors could reach them. Campise and Gattuso had failed, and their failure had handed the government a living informant with 30 years of memory. In the syndicate's arithmetic, that is not a mistake to be forgiven. That is a liability with 2 names attached. In July 1983, 5 months after the parking lot, both men were found dead in the trunk of a car. They had been made an example of, and that is all the detail this story needs. The message was not aimed at Ken Eto. He was already gone, in federal custody, out of reach. It was aimed at every other man in Chicago who might one day be handed a piece of work and be tempted to do it carelessly. But it landed differently than it was meant to, and this is the second hinge of the whole story. Every man in that organization now held 2 facts at once. The first, the outfit will kill you for failing. The second, the outfit tried to kill a 30-year earner over a gambling sentence and could not even manage that. Fear holds an organization together only while it is paired with competence. Take the competence away, and all that is left is a reason to find the nearest FBI agent first. Meanwhile, Eto was sitting with federal agents doing what he had been doing silently since 1949, paying attention, in order, without notes. He laid out the structure of the street lottery: who collected, who managed, who counted, where the cash went, and by which route it went upstairs. He explained how the operation stayed alive through raids and elections and changes of command, and then he gave them the part that actually mattered. The part that explained why a $150,000 a week illegal enterprise could run for decades in a major American city without ever being permanently shut down. He named the police. The charges against Eto himself were dropped. He had earned that in the hardest possible way. His testimony produced 15 convictions. 15 people went to prison on the word of the man from the passenger seat, and among them were corrupt Chicago police officers. The exact scene between the syndicate and the city that every outfit boss since Capone had spent money and blood to keep invisible. The gambling network he had built with his own discipline and the official protection that made it possible came apart in open court. That number deserves a moment because 15 convictions is not a headline figure. It is an infrastructure figure. Removing 15 people from an operation of that kind does not just cost the syndicate 15 employees, it costs them the specific individuals who knew how the money physically moved and which officers had to be paid for it to keep moving. Those are not roles you advertise for. Every one of them has to be rebuilt with someone who is trusted, competent, and willing to hold a job that a federal jury has just proven is prosecutable. And the arrest changed something less measurable and more dangerous for them. For decades, the deal offered to a Chicago policeman had been quietly excellent. Take the envelope, adjust the patrol map, retire on schedule. After Eto testified, that deal came with a documented public risk attached: a man in a witness chair who remembered names. The outfit did not merely lose a lottery, it lost the assumption that the city's own machinery would always be for sale in the same easy way. It did not end with the trials either. Afterward, the Bureau kept him. Ken Eto became something rarer and more useful than an informant: a translator. Federal agents brought him to other prosecutions involving the Chicago outfit and used him as an expert witness on how the organization actually functioned, Not how it looked on a wiretap transcript, but how it worked from inside the plumbing, where the money and the favors and the fear moved. The man who was never permitted to become a member spent his final professional years explaining the membership to the United States government. Now put the two men side by side, because the ending only works if you see both of them. Vincent Solano, the capo who gave the order, the union president with the office and the title, was never convicted of the attempt on Ken Eto's life. The FBI's files say he ordered it. No jury ever said so. He kept his standing in Chicago, kept his local, and died of natural causes in 1992 at 72 years old. In his own bed, a respectable man on paper to the end. Ken Eto never returned to Chicago. He was resettled through the Federal Witness Protection Program under a new name, Joe Tanaka, in Norcross, a small town outside Atlanta, Georgia. A Japanese-American man in his 60s with an unremarkable name and no past, living quietly in a suburb where nobody had the faintest idea that the polite older neighbor had once run half the street gambling in Chicago and had walked out of his own execution and into a pharmacy. He lived there for 20 more years. He died on January 23, 2004, at 84, still Joe Tanaka. He outlived the capo who ordered his death by 12 years and the two men who pulled the trigger by 2 decades. And the organization that decided he was disposable in February 1983 was, by the time of his death, a shadow of what it had been, worn down over 20 years by exactly the kind of testimony he had been the first of his kind to give. So, the question from the beginning, why did he live? The small answer is the powder. 3 underloaded cartridges in a .22 caliber pistol. Not enough charge behind a light bullet to carry it through the back of a human skull. Change one variable, a fresh box of ammunition, a heavier weapon, a shooter who checked his rounds before he got in the car, and Ken Eto becomes a missing person file, and the 15 people he convicted finish their careers in peace, and the police officers on his list retire with pensions. But the large answer is the one the outfit built itself deliberately over 30 years. They gave him everything except membership. They took his money, relied on his discipline, trusted his silence, and reminded him constantly, in 100 small ways, that he was a resource and not a relative. And because he was not family, there was no procedure to protect him. No arbitration, no permission needed from above. Nothing at all standing between Ken Eto and a phone call. The very rule that made him safe to exploit is the rule that made him cheap to kill. And when a man who has been told for 30 years that he is not one of you finally receives the proof, 3 shots at arm's length in the dark, he owes you exactly nothing. That is the bill for an organization that runs on the difference between us and them. It works flawlessly, right up to the moment it needs loyalty it never bothered to earn. Stories like this one do not make it into the history books, which is more or less why this channel exists. Subscribe if you want them. If you want the other side of that arrangement, what happens to a man the mob does call its own, who talks anyway? The story of Johnny Rosselli is on the channel now. He carried a job for the CIA, he testified in front of the United States Senate, and 108 days after his last appearance, he surfaced inside a steel drum in a Florida bay. 2 men, 2 answers, 1 organization.